Hi, today's topic for discussion will be risk. What is investment risk? What are the various types of investment risk? And most important of all, how do we manage such risks? In layman's terms, risk is the degree of uncertainty in any stage of life. For example, while crossing a road, why does one look left or right? This is to mitigate the risk of being hit by any oncoming traffic. Likewise, when it comes to investments, we must consider all the risks that are involved. This brings us to what is investment risk? Simply put, risk is the range of fluctuation an investor can afford to withstand in his effort to generate a certain return on his investment. Now let's talk about a widely used term, risk appetite. With an example, if the investor can withstand significant fluctuation on his returns of his principal investment, then his risk appetite is considered high. The trait of such an investor is the ability to endure sharp fluctuations in his portfolio temporarily. Conversely, if the investor cannot withstand sharp fluctuations in his portfolio and cannot afford to lose money on his original investment, his risk appetite is considered low to moderate. Why should one consider risk? While making an investment, there are two factors that one must consider. First being the risk of the investment, and second is the probable returns. Since both of these are two sides of the same coin, they are interlinked. The thumb rule of risk is the higher the risk, the higher the returns. Therefore, in order to become an intelligent investor, one must understand risk. This brings us to the types of risks. All investment risks can be broadly categorized under systematic and unsystematic risk. Starting with systematic risk, for us to basically understand it as a concept, it is when macroeconomic factors are at play. This is basically a risk that one cannot diversify against or cannot insulate themselves against. This is the type of risk that affects the whole industry or an economy. Certain examples of systematic risk can be an unstable government, a natural disaster, or changing interest rates or inflation rates. Alternatively, unsystematic risk are risks that can be protected against or insulated from. These risks exist due to microeconomic factors and are company specific or asset specific. An example of an unsystematic risk can be the top level management of a company being in a certain type of conflict or scam, therefore driving down share prices of their stocks. Or it could be an example of a manufacturing plant going up in flames, therefore affecting the productivity of the company and therefore driving down the prices of their stocks. This now brings us specifically to mutual fund risks. Mutual fund risks can be broadly classified based on the asset class, which is equity or debt, and each of these asset classes bring with them three types of risks. Under equity, we have management risk, we have volatility risk, and we have liquidity risk. When it comes to debt, we can refer to the three risks as interest rate risk, credit risk, and inflation risk. When it comes to equity mutual funds, as discussed, the three types of risks are volatility risk, management risk, and liquidity risk. Looking into volatility risk, equity mutual funds primarily invest in stocks of companies, which are direct equities that are listed on a stock exchange. Therefore, volatility risk means that if the share price increases or decreases, therefore the value of your investment will also increase or decrease accordingly. Management risk refers to the team that is responsible for pushing the company in the right direction. So, when there are changes in management or there is mismanagement of any kind, this affects the share price of a company. Finally, we come to liquidity risk. When we talk about equity mutual funds, our holding period or time horizon, as you can say, is a long time period where we consider it to be for 3 to 5 years in order to generate the desired returns from equity. Therefore, the liquidity of the investor can be affected for this time period of 3 to 5 years. Therefore, one must consider this carefully before making an equity investment. This brings us to the risks related to debt mutual funds. The first risk related to this is interest rate risk. When interest rates fluctuate in an economy of a country, the yield or the returns from these debt mutual funds vary. The relationship between interest rates and returns are inversely proportional. This brings us to the second risk, which is credit risk. Certain companies, in order to generate higher returns, will invest in lower quality papers. And once you invest in a lower quality paper, the risk of defaulting also increases. Therefore, the risk of getting a higher return gives you a risk of default. This brings us to inflation risk. When we invest in debt instruments, there is a fixed rate of interest. But when inflation is on the rise, our effective yield or effective return diminishes over the term of our investment. In order to simplify, if the purchasing power of your money loses value over time, inflation is beating the rate of return of your investment. This brings us to risk management. Risk management as a concept is the process of identifying, analyzing, and mitigating uncertainties when it comes to our investments. When it comes to risk management, certain practices must be adopted by all investors. Four of these main aspects are: the first being diversification, that one should not have exposure to one type of asset class, sector, or industry, as any event can cause their portfolio to reduce in value significantly. Therefore, diversification across asset classes and sectors always reduces the volatility in your portfolio. The second being that one must always focus on their investment goals. Once building a portfolio, one must take into account the time horizon to achieve such goals, and minor fluctuations that happen in the short term should not cause panic and drive an investor to pull out of an investment. One must always keep in mind what the goal is and stay patient and true to the process. This brings us to the third point, which is monitor your investments. A timely and a disciplined manner of monitoring your investments always can help you out in rebalancing your portfolio in case your investments have skewed towards one asset class or increased your exposure to a sector. Therefore, the act of rebalancing your portfolio once you are straying from your financial goals is a very important task. This brings us to the final principle of risk management, which is consider financial advice. It is of no harm to go to a professional in order to help lay out your goals, in order to help set a time horizon, and in order to understand your risk appetite while building your portfolio. Therefore, to conclude, in times of uncertainty and volatility, if one sticks to these key principles of managing risk, one should be more than certain to make good investment decisions.